Today I want to talk about some lessons from the death of Nipsey Hussle. Nipsey Hussle was a young rapper from the Los Angeles area, and he tragically died in the middle of a community that he was trying to help. He had opened up businesses and he had been known to help a number of young men in the area, and it was just a tragedy. There was information also that he was getting ready to meet with the police department to see how he could reduce violence in the area. So this is all very, very commendable, and it's great, that someone was trying to make a contribution, and it's tragic that he died. But whenever there's death, whenever there's tragedy, there are also lessons. And so I just want to talk about some of the lessons that I believe can be learned from his life. The first lesson is that it's important to give back. And it's important to try to change your environment. And I think he provided a good example of that. The second lesson that I want to talk about is the fact that the culture is still a problem. Now, what do I mean by the culture? I'm talking about the rap, hip-hop culture, the gang culture. While it was commendable, all the things that he did, the environment that he came from and the environment that's now perpetuated by rappers. So we have rappers who are not just saying, let's go and build our communities. They are constantly singing about killing one another. They are constantly attaching themselves to gangs, even when they're not gang affiliated. In fact, if you look at the whole gangster rap movement, it's a strange movement in the sense that some of the prominent figures who were involved in gangster rap were not really gangsters and didn't grow up in that culture. So they were promoting something that is detrimental and harmful, and they themselves were not involved in it. They either became involved or attached themselves to it. People like Tupac, people like Ice Cube, and so on. To the point where they started using the moniker of studio gangster versus real gangster. But the thing about it is, why does music have to be about gangs? And how is that going to help build a community? When I look at some of the lyrics of current rappers, even Nipsey Hussle, I just want you to listen to this because I think this tells us that something is wrong with the culture. For example, on one of his songs, I pull out some of the lyrics. It says, I ain't nothing like you effing rap niggas. Hustle man is a shooter, and that's a fact, nigga. 32 extendos in my Mac, nigga. Murder rate increasing if I snap, nigga. Ain't no hanging out. We'll tape you all off and double back, nigga. Chopper to his face. Now that's a rap, nigga. Streets talk, and that's a rat, nigga. Serving fiends off the steps, nigga. Murder sprees for the set, nigga. All facts, ain't no MFing threat, nigga. Now, when we look at it, here's a young man who's trying to do something very positive. But the culture of rap and hip-hop is not positive. And you can just listen to the lyrics. A chopper is sometimes referred to as an AK-47. So he's talking about, I'm not a fake gangster like some of these other rappers. I was a real gangster. So I was someone who shot people. Now, why you have to distinguish yourself, that tells you that there's a problem in the culture. So the culture has evolved to the point where people feel like they have to kill people in order to have credibility. And that's a sad reality. And when I look at the results of the whole gang culture, it's just amazing that people continue to perpetuate this. For example, I saw an interview on YouTube with a gentleman named Mob James from the Mob Pyru. And he was saying, he was looking back on his life, and he said, this was a total waste. At the end of the day, all of your friends, your brother, so many people are dead, and there's nothing accomplished from it. The whole gang culture is really a dead-end culture, but yet it's continually perpetuated in the music and in the hip-hop world. And this is not a productive thing for us as young people and especially inner city communities, for Latinos and blacks and so on especially, it just does not make sense. But yet, we are saying that we're trying to do good and we're perpetuating this culture. At some point in time, there has to be a shift, and people need to be focused on how do you develop businesses, how do you get an education, how do you find success in another avenue other than just killing your neighbor, selling dope to somebody in your community. So I think that's another important lesson from this whole exercise. The third lesson that I want to talk about is that more is needed. Now, what do I mean by more is needed? When I say more is needed, Nipsey Hussle did something that was very commendable. He tried to help. He tried to build a community. The problem is that you don't have enough rappers and enough entertainers, but especially those who come from this culture, who are trying to give back in a tangible way. You know, sometimes people are talking about it, but they're not doing anything. If we want to talk about building our communities, changing our communities, and reducing the violence, more is needed. And some of you may be saying, well, it's a futile exercise, nothing is going to happen. Well, the truth of the matter is, I can tell you that a lot can happen from it. And you may say, well, you know, Pastor Dave, what do you know about this? Well, the reality is I led a movement. In fact, I led a couple of movements that went into gang communities and reached out to young men. And I saw several of these young men's lives change. Today, some of them are husbands, they are fathers, some of them are prolific in the community, doing good things. Some are pastors, businessmen. So I've seen it happen, and I've worked with a number of gangs, a number of gang members here in the Bahamas, and I also had contact with gang members in LA and other places. And so change is possible if you're willing to put in the work. One of the things that I did, because I came from a street background also, one of the things that I did was in some of the local high schools, I went to the principal of the school and the guidance council, and I said, look, give me all of your gang members, give me all your bad boys, and I will work with them. And in one of the schools here in the Bahamas, I worked with all of the gang members, a number of the gang members, and a number of the bad boys, and several of them saw a dramatic turnaround. So change is possible, but more is needed. We have to go in, we have to reach out, we have to tell young people that there's a better way, and then we have to make contributions. And then the final lesson that I want to mention is that all things are possible if you believe. This is a statement that Jesus made. You know, a lot of people say, well, you know, the hood is the hood and it's not going to change. Well, if you take that attitude, then, you know, things just remain the same and it really never changes. However, if you take the attitude that all things are possible, you know, Nipsey Hussle gave an example that it was possible to give back, it was possible to make some difference in your community. And when we look at it, those of us who subscribe to the gospel of Jesus Christ, it's amazing what we can do. Because many of us who are gospel ministers, who are gospel rappers, who are working in the community, many of us came from street backgrounds. Many of us came from gang cultures. And so you can't say it's impossible. All things are possible if you believe. So we have to become active. We have to connect with one another. We have to learn what can be done to change our environment, because change is possible. But change is not possible by perpetuating a very negative, destructive culture. We have to tell people there's a better way, and we have to tell people the stories. I've seen several videos on YouTube of gangsters saying, well, you know, if I had known better, I would have never gotten into this. You know, there was one gangster from New York, I think his name is Pee Wee Kirkland. He made a really dramatic statement. He said, you know, if I had known what I was getting into, and this was a guy who made millions as a drug dealer. He said, you know, if I had known what I was getting into, I would never do this. He said, man, I would rather take a toothpick and and pick excrement from a dog's tail as opposed to getting into this lifestyle again. So we need to hear from people who have been through the lifestyle, who have changed and who recognized that it was destructive. I also saw a video from a guy who left the mafia, and he was saying the same thing. He was saying, this lifestyle is destructive, it doesn't make sense. We shouldn't really have to tell people that, but the truth of the matter is, those who've experienced both sides need to speak up. That's what I've done in my life. I've experienced both sides of it. I've experienced the street side, and I've experienced living a better life. And I've found a better way. And so I make it my point, I make it an effort to tell young people that there is a better way. So thanks once again for listening, and I hope that you take these lessons that I've given today and apply it in your community so that we can see better happening all around us. Thanks again.